Did everyone just spontaneously know it was 1 o'clock? Welcome, everyone. It's exciting that we've reached the day of having this, and I just want to thank you all for being here for what I believe is a very important discussion for Carolina and for higher education and for college sports. And I just want to thank all of the panelists who are here, and I'm going to turn it over to Hunter Rawlings for a couple of things, and then I'll be back to introduce our speakers and begin our program. So, Hunter, take away.
Thank you, Holden. It's a pleasure to be here at Chapel Hill on one of the most beautiful weeks of the year. It's a special pleasure. My wife, Elizabeth, is a graduate of Chapel Hill twice over in French, and I've never seen her happier than being here this week. So it's a great time to be here at the People's University, as I know you call it. This is an important topic, and I'm pleased that Holden called upon several of us to try to be helpful to you. Today, we're really here to listen. We would like very much to hear from the panel that has been assembled to speak to us, but we'd also like to hear from members of the Chapel Hill community, faculty members, students, and others. And we hope that you will speak up because we're here to listen today, and then we'll start to go to work on this whole set of issues that has been laid in front of us. It is very important, not just for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, but for the nation's universities for reasons we all know. So thank you very much, Holden.
Thank you, and I think I've already made one misstep, which is not to tell you all to push the button in front of you when you're talking. So thank you all for being here. This, as I said, is an important occasion for Carolina and for higher education in general. And to the panelists, we're honored that all of you would be here with us. I believe, and I think most of my colleagues around the country would as well, that big-time college athletics are here to stay. I get asked many times if I had a magic wand, would I get rid of it? And the answer is no. And the reasons are very simple. One of the biggest challenges in running a university is getting alumni to return to campus. This builds loyalty to the university, which helps spread news of the university's accomplishments, enhances fundraising, and builds general goodwill. The schools that do not have big-time sports struggle mightily with this. Consider the University of Chicago, an institution that is held in very high esteem by academics. The general public probably doesn't know about the University of Chicago, and most would confuse it with Northwestern or the University of Illinois at Chicago, both of which play Division I sports. Some sports people have heard of the University of Chicago because they famously got out of football, but most people don't know that they now play football in Division III. In contrast, last year, 1 million visits were made to Chapel Hill to attend basketball and football. And approximately $100 million worth of UNC licensed clothing and items were sold. I once traveled on 3 planes and a boat to a remote island in the Galapagos Islands and hiked 30 minutes to the top of a volcano. And there was one person there, and he had on a Carolina hat. And I said, "Are you from North Carolina?" And he said, "No, I'm from Maine, but I love the Tar Heels." So big-time sports are here in Chapel Hill, Tuscaloosa, Gainesville, Ann Arbor, and all of the great college towns where public universities are to stay. And if we want the benefits that I just described, we need to win. So what I hope the panel will do is think about 2 things. First, what can an individual institution like Carolina do to better navigate these waters? And second, what positions can individual institutions take on the larger questions facing the national scene in college sports? So after today, I'm going to turn it over to you, and Hunter will say some things about how you plan to organize yourselves going forward, but I and my colleagues organized the program of speakers that we've invited today, and then we'll have time at the end for anyone in the audience who wants to speak. But first, Bubba Cunningham, our athletic director, will give you some background on the NCAA and Carolina athletics. Then I will talk to you about the concept of presidential control, which you've already heard something about my views on that. And then Jay Billis will talk to you about amateurism and anything else that he's interested in. Then Richard Southall, who runs our College Sports Research Institute, which happens to be having their conference right now, will share some of his research findings. And Amy Perko will be on an important panel there at 3:25 this afternoon, so we will wrap up in time to get her there. And then I've asked two faculty members to give their perspectives, Joy Renner from Allied Health Science, who chairs our Faculty Athletics Committee, and Jay Smith from the Department of History. So first we're going to hear from Bubba Cunningham, our athletic director.
Thank you, Holden. Really appreciate this opportunity, and really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share some thoughts and to have such a great group here to listen to what's happening at the University of Carolina and weigh in on the national dialogue of intercollegiate athletics. So be a little bit tricky to work a remote, turn some pages, and also do some speaking. So I hope this goes well. First of all, Hunter, I'd really appreciate your time and effort to come here, organize the panel, and discuss some of the national issues. You were here in September, and you talked about 5 different reasons that college presidents have turned over, and you were quite concerned about that number. And one of the 5 issues that you talked about were intercollegiate athletics. So hopefully this dialogue and dialogues on other campuses may reduce the pressure and tension on presidents and chancellors, so we don't have that as one of the turnover rates in higher education, because I think there's too many good things going on in higher ed to have athletics spoil it for presidents and chancellors. To our panel, really appreciate you being here. A great background, a great diverse background, from commissioners to judges to Knight Commission to college professors. It is a great opportunity to share different views, and we again appreciate your time and willingness to be a part of this. When I think about intercollegiate athletics today, I think there are basically 3 dominant characteristics. And the first one is the national interest in sport. We used to be a regional sporting activity. All of our conferences were by universities had similar geographic basis. We had rivalries, and generally the universities were similar size and similar academic interests. But today it's a national competition, it's a national brand, and we're competing on a national basis for all of our sports programs. The second thing is, I think that the current environment is exceptionally commercial. We have gotten into the commercial activity. We've been in the commercial activity for quite some time, but between our television contracts, the mega games that we all have throughout the country, it has really been a challenging time for all of us to manage those different variables. And then the third thing, I believe, is that the challenge of the governance. And we've talked an awful lot about governance, whether it's national governance at the NCAA level, governance from the conference level, or governance on our campus, or in some cases, the difference between the governance structure at a flagship university and the system itself. But again, those 3 dominant factors are really what's driving athletics today: the national audience, commercialism, and control. And I think we have to have some dialogue about all of those. But make no mistake, what is driving intercollegiate athletics today is football, and the BCS is right in the center of it. But what I thought might be helpful to some in the room, some are going to know these benchmark areas in this timeline very well, others it may be new information. But I want to go back to 1972, and that's where I think that the intercollegiate athletics model really began to change. With the passage of Title IX, we doubled the population that was going to participate in intercollegiate sports. In 1978, the NCAA went from 3 divisions to 5 divisions. There was a Division I, Division II, Division III, and we split Division I into 1A, 1AA, 1 AAA, all based on football. Those are football designations. They were created to create some kind of competitive equity. So in Division 1A, you had 85 scholarships, 1AA, 63, and either no football or 0 scholarships in football in Division 3. In 1979, it was the start. It was the biggest basketball game. It's the highest rated basketball game in the history of college basketball, with Indiana State and Michigan State, and it's still the highest rated game. So television really began to take off in '79 as far as televising sports. Additionally, ESPN started in 1979, so the cable business in sports entertainment had just begun, and I don't think any of us really understood where it was going to go. Also in '79, the Big East Basketball Conference was started, and that's the first conference. I know they're geographically situated in the Northeast, but it's the first time a conference was put together strictly for a television package, and that's why the Big East was created. 1982, Jackie Sherrill became the highest university-paid employee at Texas A&M. He had a base salary of $95,000, but he had $285,000 a year in outside income and a 5-year contract of $1.7 million. In 1982, USA Today started, and the insatiable appetite for college sports was printed on a daily basis. The first true national championship football game was in 1984, Nebraska versus Miami in the Orange Bowl. And again, that's when the mega event really started to take off. In 1984, Georgia and Oklahoma sued the NCAA. Up until that time, the NCAA had all the rights to televise our games, and Georgia and Oklahoma sued for the right for institutions or conferences to negotiate on their own behalf, but no one did it immediately. In 1984, Michael Jordan got a sponsorship with Nike. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson had been endorsed by Converse in previous years, but I believe in 1984, that's when corporations understood that celebrity athletes could market and sell product. I also believe that is the time that we lost control of amateur basketball in the AAU when Sonny Vaccaro and some of the sports marketing firms started directly merchandising to coaches and to students at a very young age. As this commercialism crept in, we saw all kinds of problems at SMU, and we gave SMU the death penalty in 1987, thinking that harsher penalties would curb this behavior. But as we had more commercialism into our system, we then realized that death penalty is probably something that we won't do again. We haven't had a death penalty since, and we realized that if you ban the opponents from television, then you're economically disadvantaging the other teams and not just the one that you're trying to punish. In 1987, the presidents wanted to really get involved and step in and talk about control and talk about leading the NCAA and leading athletic departments on the college campuses. In 1989, we had the beginning of the Knight Commission. We had the first report, the call to action, and then we had restoring the balance. And then in 1989, the NCAA signed a historic contract with CBS for $1 million for 6 years to televise the NCAA basketball tournament. And I thought it was funny when one of the sports reporters asked Joe Roberson, the AD at Michigan, and said, "Do you think that footwear and apparel companies are getting too involved in college athletics?" And his response was, "No, TV won't let them." So we're living with that consequence today. In 1990, Notre Dame, as an individual institution, signed its own contract with NBC, thereby breaking up the CFA. And then shortly thereafter, there was a flurry of conference activity. In 1990, Penn State joined the Big Ten. The SEC took South Carolina from the ACC and Arkansas from the Southwest Conference. It was the demise of the Southwest Conference which created the Big 8, which morphed into the Big 12. Florida State was added to the ACC, and Miami joined the Big East in football, and they started a football branch of the Big East Conference that was developed for television and for basketball only. Then in 1982, the SEC hosted the first ever conference championship football game, and now in 1998, we have the BCS, which has gone from an alliance, from a coalition to an alliance to a BCS, and now to a BCS playoff that will begin in a couple of years. So as you can imagine, as we have developed and more commercial activity has gotten into intercollegiate athletics, we talked about academic integrity, and we've made incredible progress in academic integrity. We've increased academic initial standards for eligibility for participation. We've increased our standards for continuing eligibility. We've increased graduation rates. But the incredible volume of the fiscal growth of intercollegiate athletics has drowned out anything that has to do with credibility in raising the academic standards. We have had a period of time where we talked about fiscal responsibility and fiscal restraint. We cut back scholarships by 10% across the board. We tried to control the rate of growth, but I think most would argue it has been very unsuccessful. Some of the major issues I think we have today that some of our speakers will talk about is amateurism and agents. The whole discussion about pay per play and show me the money. The O'Bannon case, and how does all of that relate to Title IX? In addition to those issues, we do have our governance problems that we're continuing to suffer and look at today. We have moved from a one school, one vote model to a representative governance structure, and I don't believe it's working. I think that we need to go back to a system that allows for better dialogue much like we're having today. I think the enforcement staff has grown tremendously. The NCAA staff has grown. The infrastructure has grown. And I think it's something that we need to examine on a much more national basis. Occasionally, the NCAA, I believe, steps out ahead of itself. This is a picture of what they did with some of the Penn State students and how they acted in the Penn State situation. And I think it was beyond the pale of their responsibility. Considerations as we move forward, and I believe this will be the foundation of our discussion today. I do believe it is governance, but I think the entire NCAA process was founded on competitive equity. How do we get like schools, like-minded, to compete on an equitable basis? We have done that through the years by limiting the number of coaches, by limiting the number of scholarships, and offering a broad array of activities on a campus at the various levels. I do think we need to take a look at the finances of intercollegiate athletics as well as our academic standards as we move forward. But I think as we drive this dialogue into the next few months and years, I think there are two core principles that we need to keep in mind. I think that we need to primarily talk about education. Every student that we invite to this campus, we need to guarantee them an education, a valuable education that'll be worthwhile and meaningful and allow them to have a productive life. In addition to that, I think we also have to maximize the number of opportunities of people to participate in the sports that they love. So if we can keep our mind on education and opportunities, I think we have some valuable dialogue going forward. We have been very fortunate in this past year to work through a strategic plan with Dr. Paul Friga, who's here today, in our Keenan Flagler Business School. We spent a lot of time coming up with 6 words for the University of North Carolina and our mission of intercollegiate athletics. And it's really quite simple. We think we educate and inspire through athletics. We do bring back people to campus. There are students on campus that don't participate in intercollegiate athletics, but take great pride in being a part of this institution. And we need to understand that it is inspirational to young children. It's inspirational to older alumni that want to come back and see how these kids manage all of their responsibilities. Our core values that we have are responsibility, innovation, service, and excellence. Our priorities are quite simple as well. We only have 4. It's alignment. And it's academic achievement, athletic achievement, and administrative engagement. I firmly believe my role as the AD is to ensure that our athletic department is properly aligned to fulfill the mission of this institution and to make the institution better because of athletics. We have great coaches, we have great student athletes, they are educated, and they do graduate, and I think that we have a wonderful chance to lead the country in this dialogue about how we can make intercollegiate athletics better. I do appreciate your opportunity and time, and now we'll yield the mic back to Chancellor Thorp. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bubba. That was great and a great way to set the stage for all of this. So now I'd like to turn to the question of governance and in particular the role of presidents and chancellors in the governance of intercollegiate athletics. You know, because of Mr. Friday's role in the Knight Commission, this is an idea that all of us have heard about many times, and I heard about even growing up in North Carolina. And it has been repeated by the press in North Carolina frequently, and it is part of the rhetoric of college sports, and Bubba already alluded to that. And I want to make the case to you that it might have been a good idea when it was proposed, but we're having an awfully hard time with it now. And I think this presidential control idea has sort of gotten away from us. And so I'm here to make the proposal that we consider what the proper role and the best role for presidents and chancellors is in college sports. So the idea of presidential control was that if college presidents and chancellors were responsible for athletics, academic values would be more strongly asserted. As a result, the ADs in Division I report directly to the chancellor or the president. The conferences are run by councils of the member presidents, and the NCAA Board of Directors is made up of presidents. Before I explain why I think this initiative has failed, let's examine a few of the things that presidential control was supposed to fix. It was supposed to produce less corruption. It was supposed to make it easier to make rules. It was supposed to reduce the escalation of money in college sports. And it was supposed to give academics the ability to change college sports. It's almost hard to keep from laughing when you say these things because obviously it hasn't worked. Now let me explain what I think the reasons are. The first problem is that college presidents usually have not had any exposure to big-time sports before becoming presidents. I say usually because my good friend and certainly one of the best presidents in the country, Bud Peterson of Georgia Tech, was a wide receiver for the Kansas State Wildcats. But most of us were working in the lab or library, teaching, publishing, until we moved into administrative jobs where we did things like grant tenure, start new degree programs, and work on accreditation. When I was in middle school, before I became the chancellor of North Carolina, I did play defensive tackle for the Honeycutt Giants. And I started, but it was only because we only had 22 people on our team. Then one day I woke up and Roy Williams, Anson Dorrance, Sylvia Hatchell, Mike Fox, and so many other great coaches were all working for me. And I enjoyed it immensely, and I'm happy to see all my friends from athletics here today. It's been an honor to work with all of you. And I consider all of the people that I've worked with in athletics to be dear friends. And after 5 years and all that I've been through, I know enough to run college sports now. But I think we can all agree it wasn't exactly a smooth road to enlightenment. And I certainly didn't know enough to run college sports 5 years ago. The search committee asked me one question about it. And I think this narrative is typical for most of my colleagues around the country. The second problem is that presidents and chancellors don't have time to do what is asked of us by this presidential control idea. We go to conference or NCAA meetings to discuss new rules, and when we get home, our ADs tell us we are crazy to agree to these changes. And they're usually right. The presidential retreat that Mark Emmert had was a good idea, but it has a lousy record in terms of coming up with ideas that were ultimately approved by the membership. This is because presidents are fighting political battles, fundraising, dealing with the hospital, and trying to help the governing boards understand the inner workings of higher education. People ask me all the time why I didn't let the AD do more of the public relations during the problems that we have had at North Carolina. This is what most good public relations consultants will tell you to do. And the answer is that the governing boards and this concept of presidential control didn't give me much of a choice. Every time I appeared to discuss athletics at a board meeting, which in North Carolina is always with the media there, was at the request of the board who specifically wanted me to come talk to them. That's not their fault. This presidential control idea has created the impression that the president or chancellor should be the one to speak for the university to the governing boards about athletics. Third problem is that making the president or chancellor the only academic administrator accountable for athletics allows the rest of the administration to check out. Oh, that's the chancellor's problem. I have to admit, I've said that myself when I was in other roles at Carolina. The other consequence of this is that when deans and provosts become chancellors and presidents, they have no prior experience with athletics. Which brings me to the last point, which is that presidential control has the unintended consequence of bringing the governing board closer to athletics. It was supposed to have the opposite effect. but the presidents work for the governing boards. And many of the governing boards can include at least some, but by no means all, people who sought the appointment precisely so that they could get close to athletics. So we have a bunch of college professors working for boards that have a lot of sports fans, and we wonder why it isn't working. The upshot of it is that college presidents are capable of doing really smart things and usually get most crises handled well. But a sports crisis reduces really smart people into people who appear inept and sound inarticulate. The reason is that there's no place to hide. You have the sports fans going crazy if they don't get their players in the game, and the media and much of the faculty expecting, because of this presidential control idea, that the president or chancellor can wave a wand and somehow make it all go away. A very smart sports person told me that the best you can hope for is a tie. So that's what people play for. This concept of playing for a tie is a very good way of understanding why our controversy at North Carolina went on for such a long time. So this brings me back to your instructions. I asked you to think of two things, and one are concrete steps that Carolina can take, but also the positions that Carolina can take on national issues. I'm saying a lot more today than I would say if I wasn't going to Division III to be a provost. My successor will be here soon, and she will not want to say anything that will make the NCAA upset or cause the fan base to start an email campaign to the board, which shouldn't work, but it does. But hopefully, my saying these things will make it easier for her. You hear all the time that the presidents of the universities have the power to fix this. I don't agree. We can't fix the NCAA or the conferences because we have to get a huge number of our colleagues to agree with us at the same time. And we can't fix our own situations because the alumni and the governing boards want their victories and they want the agony of disagreement over college athletics to end as soon as possible. So to me, that leaves two choices. Either we put the ADs back in charge and hold them accountable if things don't work. And Bubba Cunningham said to me earlier, "What are you doing?" I said, "Bubba, I trust you. That's what I'm saying about this whole thing." Or let's be honest and tell everyone when we select them to run institutions that have big-time sports that athletics is the most important part of their job. So thank you. And now, when we were organizing this, the person that I felt was the most important to come talk to you was Jay Billis, and thankfully he agreed. And Jay, thank you for being here. Jay's book Toughness is on the New York Times bestseller list, and he is an extraordinary commentator on social media and on television about all of this. So Jay, we're thrilled to have you with us today.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be in Chapel Hill. I'm a very popular person here. Primarily because I was more directly responsible for more Carolina wins over Duke than Michael Jordan was. People often come up to me, Carolina fans will come up and say, you know, I hate Duke, but I don't hate you, which is a nice way of saying you sucked as a player and we really don't sweat you. But it's an honor to be here. This is obviously a very important task that Chancellor Thorp has given to this distinguished panel, and I'm honored to provide some of my thoughts. I was asked to speak on the concept of amateurism. And it's interesting, when I have heard for years since I was an athlete in college that athletics, college athletics, is a vital part of the educational process in college. And when you hear that, just as Chancellor Thorp said a little bit earlier, it's hard to listen to that without laughing. That college coaches are not looked upon as educators. They're not tenured. Athletes do not get college credit for participating in sports. If college sports is so vital to the educational process, why don't we have more teams? Why aren't more people involved in it? If it has such great educational value, I think athletics itself has great educational value, but I don't think that value begins with your matriculation to a college campus and ends when you leave. I think it starts long before that when you first participate, and it lasts throughout your lifetime as you participate in sports. You can learn valuable lessons in athletics, but college isn't the only place for it. And when I think about amateurism, when you read, let me say one more thing about the educational part. When you read the NCAA rule book, the one thing that is inescapable, at least the conclusion that I reach that is inescapable, is if you leave college coaches to their own devices, they will cheat. I think that is absolutely wrong. And I think it's the wrong tack that we take. That rule book is a joke. If we were to start now, I can't imagine we would design the structure and the rules the way they are designed. And I do think we have a compelling argument that we need to start over. But on the subject of amateurism, I approach this a little bit differently. In the rule book and in the bylaws, amateurism is a bedrock principle of the NCAA and intercollegiate sports. A bedrock principle. I don't see it as being a bedrock principle, nor do I see it as being a vital or important principle. I see it as being a sham. We have professional athletes that play college sports right now, and the world spins comfortably on its axis just fine. We have professional baseball players that make hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases millions of dollars, that play college football and college basketball, and nobody says a word. There aren't op-eds in the New York Times about how this is horrible, it affects the purity of athletics. It's legal and nobody says anything. It doesn't affect the athletes' relationships with their fellow athletes. It doesn't make them outside of the educational process or somehow make a mockery of the educational process. It works just fine. Money is not the issue with regard to athletes, because we've got professional athletes that are playing and we're not seeing major problems. The problem is the restriction we have from athletes receiving money. And we spend a lot of time talking about pay for play. And the question becomes, how would we do it? How would we pay everybody? Would we pay them all the same? Would we have to provide the men and the women the same thing? How would we pay the wrestler versus the star quarterback? How about the swimmer versus the star point guard? And I always laugh when I hear those things, because in college sports, when we discuss should the athlete get more than a scholarship, and really a scholarship is only an expense. A scholarship, an athletic scholarship, is an expense incidental to a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's an expense. Should we give the athlete more than expenses? And their expenses that we provide to other students with other types of scholarships. We don't ask, should they be restricted? Think about it this way. The athlete is the only person in a university community that is restricted from compensation beyond expenses. The only person. No other person is restricted in any way. Just the athlete. And when that happens, I think we have to ask why. Why are we restricting this one class of people from receiving more than just expenses? It has created, we can go into all kinds of things that have come from that, unintended consequences. It has created an underground economy. It has created scandals that really don't need to be scandals. And the reason I said there's no scandal with regard to professional athletes playing college sports now, because it's legal. We have scandals with regard to tattoos and taking extra benefits. You know, if a local eatery provides something to eat for an athlete, that's a scandal because of the rules. I don't see that as being a scandal. And so we wind up talking about how will we pay the athletes, because the model is unsustainable. Well, when I was in college, college athletics was just made hundreds of millions of dollars. And they said, we don't have enough money. We couldn't pay that. Well, that's not a principle. We don't have enough money is not a good argument with regard to the principle of amateurism. That should carry the day. The answer to everything with regard to money should be, we believe in the principle of amateurism if we really believed in it. We don't really believe in it. And the NCAA president, Mark Emmert, was asked recently about what's been called the Olympic model. The Olympics took amateurism out of its charter in the 1970s. So Olympic athletes have been professional for a long time. Right? People said back then, you allow Olympic athletes to make money, and this entire enterprise will collapse. People don't want to see that. They like the purity of it, the purity of amateurism. That's clearly was wrong. That the Olympics are more profitable than ever, they're more popular than ever. Olympic athletes are valued and admired. And we've got Olympic athletes that are playing sports now. Missy Franklin, who was a star at this last Olympics, is going to University of California, Berkeley. And she has to turn her back on commercial opportunities in order to make the choice of pursuing her education and competing at the same time. I don't think she should have to make that choice. I think we would all do just fine if she were able to act in the marketplace like any other person can. You know, Holden was kind enough to mention I've written a book. Now, if I wrote that book in college, I could not have sold and marketed that book. That would have violated the principle of amateurism. I would have been declared ineligible. Whereas the person sitting next to me in class, the English major who's on a scholarship, an English scholarship, could have a book, sell it, and make all the money he or she wanted. Now, that's not an athlete being treated like every other student. That's an athlete being restricted, and the only person that's restricted. And that's a problem. And it's a conceptual problem, and I think it's a moral problem. I have considered it for a long time to be immoral to restrict athletes from getting more than just a scholarship when we don't have a reason for doing so. Amateurism, if you go back and research it, and I've done that, all amateurism really is the elites not wanting to compete against the common man, not wanting to compete against the unwashed masses. There's no purity or there's no benefit to the athlete that comes from it. You're not a better athlete, you're not a better student, you're not a better teammate, you're not a better person by virtue of your amateurism. There's no data behind that, it doesn't exist. The only amateurs, as I understand it, the only true amateurs in the United States are golfers. We have amateur golf. Golf doesn't generate any revenue, doesn't make any money. And the amateur golfer decides whether he or she will practice. The amateur golfer decides whether he or she will play. Will I play in the U.S. Amateur this summer? I don't have time, I'm not going to, or I'd rather not. It's too far across the country, I'm not going to go. I can tell you as a college athlete, I never got to decide whether I would practice and whether I would play. When we took a bus trip to Clemson, I didn't think it'd be that much fun, I had to go. College sports is professional. The only thing amateur about it right now is the structure and the leadership. And the only thing amateur about it is the players don't get anything. And when I say the leadership, I don't mean particular individuals. I mean the structure that we have is that we're not running this like the business that it is. This is a multi-billion-dollar business, and we're not running it the right way. And last thing on amateurism, because I think it's worthy of discussion and worthy of thinking about. Why are we restricting these athletes? There's got to be some benefit flowing to the athlete from it, because we say that we're protecting them from commercialization. We've done a pretty good job of that, haven't we? I mean, if you went to the Final Four this year, you went to the BCS championship game, the only difference in those events from the NBA, from an NBA championship game or the Super Bowl, is the fact the players don't get anything. That's the only difference. It's a professional enterprise, and it generates billions of dollars. There's more than enough to compensate the players and for institutions to make their own decisions. If you substituted the word college athlete with college administrator, with professor, with coach, could you imagine if there was a discussion on campus here, geez, the professors want to be paid. How are we going to do that? Are we going to pay the science professor the same we pay the English professor? How will we have to pay everyone the same? How will we do it? It's absurd when you think about it. And the athlete is last. It's always last. We don't have enough money left over. Well, if we had a free market system, then we'd have to start making choices. Right now we have a cartel where the athletes are not even considered in the issue. And I think if we're going to have a principle, we should stick to the principle and decide what it really means and what it is and defend it. I don't hear anybody standing up to defend the principle of amateurism. The arguments are all about competitive balance. They're all about we don't have enough money. That's not a principle. And I mentioned before the president of the NCAA, Mark Emmert, was asked about the Olympic model. And his response was, that's vastly different because Olympic athletes are not subject to being recruited from one country to another. So we would wind up having a bidding war for college athletes because they can be recruited. We don't use terms like that with any other person in university life. We don't say, my goodness, there's a bidding war right now for Roy Williams between Kansas and North Carolina. That term wasn't used. It was business. You know, he was offered it wasn't a bidding war. And there weren't questions about, is this sustainable? You know, but when we talk about athletes, now it's a bidding war. And we talk about facilities, it's an arms race. But everything else is just business. And the athletes can participate just fine. They would be okay. And the world would continue to spin on its axis, I believe, even if they had agents. You know, there was a photograph up there of Jerry Maguire, of Tom Cruise playing Jerry Maguire. And we have this idea that if we allowed the players to have agents, boy, look out then. Right now, the players aren't allowed to have agents, but agents are all over the place. What a rule against agents does is it clears the playing field of all reputable agents and all ethical ones who are on the sidelines, and it gives open field running to the unethical. So the players have to navigate that. And I have an agent. I can tell you, as soon as I finished my last game at Duke, I had an agent the next day. I was no different. I was still in school. I was still a student athlete, but I had an agent the next day. And it's funny, when you can do a legitimate business deal with an agent, you sign a contract, and that contract is binding. No other agent could approach me, not that I had a bunch that were looking to do that, but no other agent could approach me without rights being asserted by my agent. I could not leave without my agent asserting legal rights against me. It operated pretty smoothly as a free market enterprise. The players could do just fine if we allowed that, and they would be able to navigate it just fine. And I think we need to think about, why are we restricting this one class of person? And would we make more intelligent choices if we brought this out into the open and had it normal business practice instead of this underground economy that we've got now, and that has created, just by virtue of the rule structure, scandals. The NCAA has been in scandal mode and in crisis mode since 1906, when it was founded. It was founded in scandal, it has continued in scandal, and it will continue in scandal unless there's change in the way the rules are structured and in the way that the governance is structured. I trust, this is the last thing I'll say, I trust the University of North Carolina, I trust Wake Forest, I trust UCLA, I trust UNLV, all to run their institutions the way they see fit. And then Saturday, we can all get together and play ball. It's just sports. The level playing field is the field itself. We've all got institutions that have different structures, they have different missions, they have different financial means. They all make different decisions with regard to their finances. That's all fine. We can meet on Saturday and play, and we all know that if you step out of bounds, it's a violation. If you hit somebody when they're shooting, it's foul, you get 2 shots. We can handle that, and then we can all go home and run our institutions the way we see fit. Because this one-size-fits-all rule structure that we've got doesn't work, and nor do I think it will work. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate being here. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Jay. I always tell people Jay Billis is my favorite Duke player, and I don't have a second favorite. Next, we're going to hear from Richard Southall, who runs our College Sports Research Institute.
Well, when I told my brother that I was going to be speaking here today, he said, "Well, who are you following?" And I said, "Jay Billis." He went, "Great. You did it again." I want to thank Chancellor Thorp for the opportunity to speak with you, and I applaud all of you on the panel for your services as panel members. My remarks today focus on an analysis of the NCAA's collegiate model of athletics and are drawn from NCAA documents, State of the Association addresses, as well as government databases. They encapsulate conclusions based upon 15 years of research into the NCAA and Division I college sport. As a companion to my oral remarks, I've developed expanded written comments like every academic, and will make them available to the panel and general public. My remarks started at 42 pages, and I pared them down. In 2003, and I quote, A term of art, the collegiate model of athletics, was created by Miles Brand, the late NCAA president, as a surrogate for, but not a replacement for, the concept of amateurism Jay talked about. In his 2004 State of the Association address, Brand used the newly created term 21 times to outline two competing models, which he called the collegiate and professional models. Categorically, Brand declared participants in the professional model are a labor force in pursuit of a negotiated salary, while college teams consist exclusively of students enrolled in the academic programs of the university. Brand, a trained philosopher, also declared as a college sport axiom the utility of monetizing college football and men's basketball, since these two sports generate resources needed to conduct all other college sports. Brand dismissed criticisms of this highly commercialized business model as nonsense, since amateur defines the participants, not the enterprise. Fundamentally, Brand's collegiate model is a free market sports business enterprise in which profit athletes, football and men's basketball players, produce revenue to cover athletic department operating expenses, including coaching and administrative salaries, capital improvements, and athletic grant and aid entitlements to expenditure or non-revenue producing athletes. Interestingly, within this collegiate model, college sport fans think they have a right to be entertained. Supporters of expenditure athletes whose market value is less than the value of their grant and aid, since they generate little or no revenue, proclaim these athletes have a right to the same compensation as FBS football and Division I men's basketball players. But since amateur defines the participants, not the enterprise, these players have no right to participate in the business of college sport. Instead, they must be, and I quote, protected from exploitation by professional and commercial enterprises, end quote. As has often been said, we simply cannot afford to pay these players. Leaving aside legal challenges to this model, the collegiate model also poses an often ignored moral dilemma. Given the majority of NCAA, FBS football, and Division I men's basketball players, including those with the greatest market value, are African American males who come disproportionately from lower to middle class socioeconomic backgrounds, and that the majority of expenditure or Olympic sport athletes are white athletes from middle to upper class backgrounds, as reflected in the comments of the athletic director of a prominent FBS university to his athletic council, that the median family income of Olympic sport athletes at his university is $500,000 a year. Thank you. $500,000 a year. So my question to this audience and to the panel, is it ethical for the NCAA and member universities to operate a regressive college sport business enterprise with the primary express justification being redistributing these profits to more affluent athletes, coaches, and administrators? Now, an often cited defense of the collegiate model is that college athletes have an access to an education. So if educational access is the quid pro quo, it makes sense to examine whether universities are meeting their end of the bargain. By any of several graduation rates, FBS profit athletes have low graduation rates and much lower than regular full-time male students. However, the large 20 to 40% negative graduation gaps for FBS football and Division I men's basketball players, as well as very strong negative correlations between athletic success and graduation gaps, should not simply be dismissed as a lack of intellect, motivation, academic preparedness, or moral capacity on the part of the players. To do so conveniently absolves universities of any culpability. Instead, we should openly and honestly examine whether such gaps in graduation rates are an inevitable consequence of the current Division I collegiate model. According to the NCAA's own research, college athletes have 40 to 50 hour per week practice and competition demands, requirements akin to that of a full-time job. Importantly, it's not just the number of hours, but the physically demanding nature of elite-level college sport, and especially in football, the possible cumulative effects of traumatic brain injuries, of which we are becoming increasingly aware, that likely take a toll on athletes' academic success. In addition, profit athletes transfer at very high rates, up to 40% over a 4-year period in Division I men's basketball. But instead of simply removing most transfers from the sample, perhaps we should focus on developing policies to address athletic role engulfment and provide athletes more equal access to an education. In addition, athletes may be encouraged to enroll or proactively placed in specific courses and/or majors with an eye on academic progress rate standards. Fundamentally, profit athletes are enmeshed in a pipeline to the pros culture in which single-minded devotion to their sport is an expectation. Indicative of this cultural myopia, a recent New York Times article highlighted, NFL team, and I quote, NFL teams want players who consider football the most important aspect of their lives, and they fear that players with broad interests may not have the requisite love for football. As a former NFL scout commented, it's nice to have players with no fallback plan. So while the collegiate model of athletics may be a lucrative business model, it is definitely poor educational policy. In addition to investigating factors that affect graduation, admission standards and process should also be examined. Mr. Cunningham was quoted in the University Gazette back in November, and he talked about it here today. If we admit someone, they're ours. We want to talk about the right way to do things, but we also have to remember that these students are ours. He's exactly right. UNC's admissions process is the real front porch of the university. UNC must ensure its admissions process is clearly understood by athletes, their families, as well as all university constituents. Facilitating such understanding should involve, at the least, 1, complete transparency in the process by which athletes may be admitted to the university. Specifically, universities should celebrate its diverse student body. Since all athletes consent to a release of their educational information by signing the student-athlete statement, specifically Part 2 of the Buckley Amendment consent, athletes admitted via the the faculty subcommittee on special talents should be publicly celebrated in the same fashion as other talented individuals, such as the identification via alphabetical listing of all 51 Moorhead scholars. 2, consistent with the athletes' Buckley Amendment consent, UNC athletes' declared majors should be reported and aggregated by sport. 3, we should develop policies to address the large gaps in graduation rates of profit athletes when compared to full-time male students. In NCAA documents, my colleague Dr. Mark Nagel and I discovered, reveal, since creating the term 10 years ago, the NCAA National Office has been intent on protecting its collegiate model through, and I quote, the consistent use of the term with the steady drumbeat of what it means, within an aggressive public and media relations campaign to provide an alternative to the doggerel of cynics, close quotes. In addition, as revenue from traditional sources has diminished, NCAA member universities have redoubled their efforts to increasingly monetize as many opportunities in college sport as possible. At all levels, those who work within college sport understand it is critical to manage and I quote from Dr. Brand, the relationship between intercollegiate athletics and corporate America and increase revenues as much as possible. Significantly within a supposedly educational environment, all 3 NCAA entities have chosen to focus their efforts on developing consistent messaging instead of ensuring equal educational access for all college athletes. As Dr. Ellen Starowski has pointed out, this aggressive public and media relations agenda has unfolded within the NCAA's federated governance structure, which isolates decision-making among a small group of major conferences and results in the entire membership, including those in Divisions 2 and 3, spontaneously consenting to a linguistic and philosophical armor of coercion. The subtle nuances in language in NCAA National Office and University Athletic Department communiques invite agreement rather than critical consideration of this collegiate model. Not surprisingly, the ethical consequences of embracing a collegiate model that monetizes profit athletes at every opportunity seems to be lost on most observers. Seemingly everyone, faculty athletic representatives, athletic directors, university and athletic department administrators, coaches, conference commissioners, media partners, licensing companies, sporting good manufacturers, merchandisers, and fans view the collegiate model as ethical and the only possible way of doing the business of college sport. As I stand here today, I would point out that a current profit athlete will not be heard from today. That is not surprising, since if asked, most prophet athletes would politely decline such an invitation, recognizing the peril of speaking openly and honestly before such a panel. Indicative of this powerlessness, within the current NCAA Division I governance structure, NCAA Division I athletes literally have no voice and no vote because they are unable to vote on any NCAA proposals or approve changes to any NCAA bylaws. Having limited access to an education and sometimes engulfed in their athletic roles, college athletes have few, if any, remedies available to them and live under the threat of officially sanctioned force in the form of a loss of eligibility for non-compliance with NCAA policies. As a result, as my colleagues Dr. Hawkins and Polite and I have noted, African-American prophet athletes who migrate to predominantly white institutions from geographically and culturally distant settings often adopt a mental and emotional state that fluctuates between resistance and conformity, disagreement and apathy. It's as if today's prophet athletes who are not here to speak today exist in another world akin to Heinlein's Strangers in a Strange Land. College sport fans alternatively worship and scorn them, glowingly praising them while denying them due process, eagerly monetizing their images, yet denying them the right to even approve or disapprove the very bylaw compliance documents used to monetize their image and likeness within the collegiate model of athletics. I urge this panel and the UNC community to confront this fundamental question. While protecting the NCAA collegiate model of athletics may be the primary focus of the NCAA president, is protecting this business of college sport the duty of this panel and this university. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
I'll try to read quickly. But first I want to say thank you, Holden, again, for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. I've said enough things publicly in the last few years to make you cringe that it's a sign of the depth of your goodwill that I'm here today. It's a humbling experience, actually, to be surrounded by so many experts in college sport. I'm no expert. I'm a historian of 18th century France. But I do have an informed perspective. And as a faculty member, what I want to focus on today are two things that faculty members can control: our attitudes and our language. So I'd like to use my time to focus on two issues, the first of which will lead into the second. First, I want to argue as aggressively as I can that the relationship between faculty and athletics departments at UNC and everywhere needs to become more openly adversarial. We as faculty must vigorously maintain our adversarial role, and both partners in the relationship of academics to athletics need to become more comfortable with friction. I don't want to point to particular sins of the past at UNC, but I'm convinced that faculty complacency contributed to the institutional breakdown from which we're still trying to recover. The "we're all in this together" approach to the management of academics and athletics didn't work for us. Now, when I refer to faculty and athletics officials as adversaries, I don't mean to imply that they're enemies, or that the people involved should dislike one another, or even that they should mistrust one another's motives. We have different motives, and for the health and long-term prospects of the university and its students, athletes included, very importantly, faculty and athletic departments must honestly acknowledge that their enterprises rest on divergent, often conflicting principles. Faculty are devoted to truth and discovery in their labs and classrooms, and to the process of educational credentialing for all degree-seeking students. In pursuit of those goals, we teach and model rigorous analysis, we maintain high academic standards, we engage with our students on a shared intellectual journey, and we assume that extracurricular pursuits are extra. The athletic department also educates, but athletic programs are dedicated first to securing the wins that bring in revenue and goodwill. And in pursuit of that goal, they recruit students whose ticket of entry to the university is athletic skill rather than academic promise. They place great time demands on their players, thus directly limiting their study time. And they use every available stratagem to keep athletes eligible to play, that is, eligible to perform the function they were brought to the university to perform. The athletics department has a huge infrastructure in place to facilitate this pursuit of wins: generous boosters, lavish facilities with nutritionists, doctors, and trainers, an army of well-paid coaches, an ever-expanding compliance office, a large and physically independent academic support program. And we faculty must see those people as our institutional adversaries as people who will pursue their goal even if it means impeding or compromising the pursuit of our goals, educating, promoting research and discovery, upholding standards, maintaining intellectual rigor across the board. The breakdowns occurred at UNC because, I would say, our adversaries applied pressure, direct and indirect, conscious and unconscious, to the academic infrastructure that it is our job as faculty to protect. If we're to protect that infrastructure more effectively in the future, we must acknowledge that we're always under siege. So we need to have an adversarial relationship, like defense and prosecuting attorneys who don't come to blows, after all. Making our best cases for our competing arguments and trusting that truth and justice will be served in the end through the very conflict that we too often seek to avoid. And here's one battleground where we need to meet right away: the semantic field through which students who play sports get defined. The prevailing term of choice, student-athlete, is a mythical one. I use myth here not in its conventional sense to refer to something that's make-believe or untrue. Rather, I use the term myth as the French rhetorician Roland Barthes used it. A myth is a speech act or act of communication that sends a whole package of culturally coded messages. Barthes called them second-order signifiers that effectively construct a narrative, a mythology that gives us pleasure and that we all like to have told to us and to tell ourselves. Myths make us feel good. They can sometimes soothe our consciences. Myths shouldn't be judged by their truth claims because that's not the point of a myth. Myths should be judged instead by their effects. And the myth of the student athlete is, I'm sorry to say, a bad one. I'll point to two reasons. First, as the historical development of the term shows, it was first used in the 1950s and then formalized and given official status in the 70s when the NCAA was trying to avoid workers' compensation claims. The term student athlete was invented to disguise. The term is a catch-all that erases, among other things, the distinction between the athletes who see themselves and are taught to see themselves as students first, and those who see themselves and are virtually required to see themselves as athletes first. It collapses the distinction, to use Richard Southall's terminology, between profit athletes and expenditure athletes. The profit athletes are the marrow, the life force of the system. And we need to isolate and analyze their experiences if we're ever to wrap our heads around the challenge we confront, the challenge of creating an honest and equitable system. So the term disguises, that's its first problem. Second, the term, when invoked by university administrators or NCAA spokespersons, applies a veneer of wholesomeness with all those culturally coded images of people going pro in something other than sports that conveniently covers up the intentions of those who concocted the term and who propagate it zealously to this day. Those people say that athletes are students first. You can look it up on the NCAA website. And that the sporting identities of athletes are incidental to their identities as students. Yet athletic departments, universities, and the NCAA profit from the labors of a certain subset of athletes, principally those in football and men's basketball. They train and treat those athletes as pre-professionals who remain under the firm tutelage of coaches and athletics personnel from their first day on campus to their last. And the business model in which they operate requires that academics remain a secondary concern, even and especially for the profit athletes who are most academically challenged. That's why 75% of UNC's athletes cluster in the same three majors. It's why challenged students often have nearly identical transcripts loaded down with the same notoriously easy courses. It's why counselors find the friendly faculty out there. It's why athletes can miss my class, when they're traveling, but they can't take my class if it conflicts with their practice schedules. These guys are not students first. And both former Missouri football player Sean Coffey and former Maryland basketball player LaRon Profit have both recently scoffed at the notion that they were brought to their campuses to be students. The student-athlete mythology allows us to rationalize all of this. It discourages us from looking behind the curtain to see the gears of a vast business enterprise and the power relationships that are central to it. I'll give a relatively minor example of the pernicious use of the term from the UNC case, since this was a public incident that many will remember. When learning specialist Mary Willingham went public last November with details of some of what she had seen and heard in the academic support program, namely the refusal of superiors to do anything about cheating she had witnessed and reported, the widespread knowledge about fraud in Julius Nagaro's courses, the purposeful exploitation of those courses to boost GPAs for the athletes who needed it. One might have expected athletics administrators to be angry, and apparently they were. but they weren't angry at the former leaders of the support program, or at the counselors who had allowed years to pass without saying a word about any of this, or at their predecessors for that matter. No, they were angry at Mary. They were angry at her for pulling back the curtain on the actual academic experiences of those athletes who are not students first. In a letter published in the Raleigh News and Observer, a UNC Athletics Department spokesman attacked Mary's account as dishonest and unfair. He said, and I quote, "It was especially unfair to student athletes who come to Carolina to get an education and play a sport," unquote. We might debate who exactly is being evoked here with reference to student athletes who come to Carolina to get an education, and that would be an interesting discussion. But this statement is as clear an example as I've seen of using the blinding myth of the student athlete as a shield to deflect criticism and to shut down suspicions that there's something unseemly going on behind that myth. We, the faculty, have to slay this dragon, this myth of the student athlete, not least because the athletes need us. We have to reassert our jurisdiction over their academic lives and their experiences. We have to ensure that they're all getting the educations they deserve and will need in life. We have to ensure that they're all indeed capable, upon admission to the university, of profiting from what UNC can offer. That they all have access to the full menu of educational opportunities available at a great university. That they're all able to freely choose what to study. That their academic pursuits and long-term futures aren't being short-circuited by the needs of an athletic department that focuses on wins necessarily. If we're to advocate successfully for the athletes, we must first ensure that we have an unobstructed vision of reality. Obfuscating myths and confusing language should be banished so we can perform our proper adversarial role and thereby perhaps rescue the athletes who are being used in the name of a fraudulent mythology. The first easy step toward a more honest and transparent relationship between academics and athletics is to strike student-athlete from the lexicon. Thank you.
Okay, our last announced speaker will be Joy Renner, who chairs our Faculty Athletics Committee.
I have a Southern accent with a New York rate, so you'll be happy I'll be fast. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Faculty Athletics Committee as their chair and as myself. I'd like to take just a second to publicly thank the members who are here today of the Faculty Athletics Committee who have worked this year to learn about the complex world of athletics, particularly here at UNC, and to develop a sustainable framework for future FACs to use to ensure a comprehensive monitoring of our athletics enterprise and to assist in the continuous improvement in the UNC experience for our students and those who participate on our teams. So there's two key features that provided a foundation for our discussion this year. One was that a bond should exist between athletics and academics and the overall missions and goals of the university. A bond instead of a bridge, because if there is a bond, any change in direction in one is immediately felt and experienced by the other. If only a bridge, then one side or the other can choose to seek out the other to share information or not, and to ask for input or not. When I took this position as chair, I spent some time thinking about the current state of our university in regards to the athletics program and how the FAC could play a critical role in moving this agenda forward. In my world in healthcare, risk assessment and poor outcome avoidance are critical features, which is why the just culture concepts are utilized throughout this industry. I felt using these concepts would be helpful in the review, the healing, and the future decisions on this campus related to athletics. In many organizations, while this may not be what is overtly seen as a mode of operation, it is often what occurs. If there's a problem, find someone to blame, punish the individual, check it off, problem is taken care of. In a just culture, we know that problem is seldom the fault of an individual, but more the fault of the system. In the context of a just culture, the management of issues are addressed according to the source of the issue. Some aspects can be attributed to human error, which could be an unclear understanding of role or responsibilities, to unclear goals and needs. These can be managed through changes in processes, procedures, through training, and through overall design. There's been much of this type of work already occurring here on this campus for the past 2 years. Unintentional risk-taking means the individual thought he or she was doing the right thing, and even thought he or she was doing it for the right reasons. By removing incentives to continue that behavior and rewarding healthy behaviors and ensuring all members of the community are aware of the environment in which they work, we move to a more stable environment. Even in the best of systems and communities, there will be individuals who continue in intentional risk-taking. At this point, the management of the situation requires remedial action or even punitive action. To create this fair and just culture, the following are key pieces. In this conversation, and this means all-inclusively, ensuring that our students, alumni, coaches, athletes, faculty, administrators, and all other stakeholders know what are the rules and expectations with nothing left to guess or for interpretation. Does everyone know them? Differentiating between an individual who has a problem versus a good person set up to fail in the system. And it's critical that we all play from the same rule book and avoid workarounds, because those workarounds can become normal operating behavior over time. Again, important key elements in a just culture include understanding the scope of the issues, encouraging conversations regarding vulnerabilities, and in providing fair treatment to all involved. This year, FAC has spent a good deal of our time understanding the complex world of the athletics program at UNC. It has not left much time for pondering the more national issues, as our first responsibility was to our university community. We have been forthrightly cautious in our approach to be sure we were accurately and fully informed about the facets of UNC athletics prior to providing judgment and suggestions for change. We have all recognized the need to be always vigilant and to develop mechanisms for seeing trends or behaviors that are moving away from the accepted and announced practices. No system is perfect, but it is important to understand the limitations and strive to continually improve our choices and the greater system. Once I worked through in my mind how the FAC could work together toward a just culture on this campus, bonding academics and athletics, the next step was to discuss with the members a plan for how to proceed with our work this year. To be effective, it was clear the FAC needed a clear understanding of purpose, as well as support for requested information, guidance from offices around the campus, and policy that gave FAC the authority to carry out its work. While the committee may disagree, there was always consideration of your time and effort available as full-time faculty members and how much you could devote to these activities. This was very important to consider for sustainability of the committee across years. Our work plan this year included monitoring existing systems, reviewing outcomes and trends, seeking out best practice information, which is an ongoing practice, providing input to new systems and policies to strengthen the experience of our student body who are participating in athletics. The committee members were charged with bringing to each discussion 3 perspectives: as a faculty member at UNC, as a content expert on his or her assigned issue or topic, and the perspective of our athletes and coaches on the various teams. This ensured we would do a comprehensive review and reflect carefully on the information before choosing future directions. The topics and issues that we included in our discussion were admissions, from recruiting through matriculation, academics and all the aspects of academics, advising and student success and all those systems and programs in place, the student-athlete experience and making sure we included the students in evaluating that experience. We also review policies and procedures from around campus, and we look at administrations and operations within the athletics program. It was a busy year. It was an ambitious work plan, and while most was completed, there are still aspects of each of these areas that were not fully explored during the first year of this committee design. Hopefully, the continuing and newly elected FAC members will keep the momentum going and continue with this process. So what we accomplished this year was we made connections. We had committee members who met with individuals and groups across this campus to gather information and perspectives, and we grew into an understanding. The athletics department and its activities are extremely complex and highly interrelated and integrated into the greater university community, and accountable to many, many, many people inside and outside this organization, and many, many governing bodies. We found early on that a small change in one aspect of a student-athlete's experience will ripple through and have an impact somewhere else along the way. This reassured us the need to be armed with knowledge and information before boldly stating the next steps for this university. We discussed matters in an informed manner that involved input from all members of the committee. This week I received a copy of the latest COA report that was published in March. In that report, there is a strong call for faculty engagement in athletics, particularly in light of the NCAA discussing a move from its previous regulation-based position to a more principle-based structure. I hope that the FAC and other groups of faculty, including Faculty Council, will have opportunities this coming year to discuss some of the pros and cons of this approach by the NCAA. Regardless of what the NCAA decides, it is clear on this campus that our faculty are dedicated and committed to being involved in ensuring that our UNC athletes have the opportunities to succeed in the classroom and on the field. One component of their proposal asks for a SAR, a Senate Athletics representative, to be appointed, and there be an AIG established, an academic integrity group. UNC is ahead of the game. We're ahead of this proposal. Our FAC serves as a connection with Faculty Council, and the chair regularly communicates with the chair of the Faculty Council. This led to the Faculty Council chair providing time on each agenda for the chair of FAC to present to the full council. With the new structure of FAC, each member has assigned areas to monitor and provide an in-depth review, which can be brought to the full committee. This seems to coincide with COA's call for an AIG. It is imperative that this campus faculty remain engaged such that UNC stays true to its identified philosophy regarding athletics, especially in the midst of outside pressures from organizations such as the NCAA. So in summary, FAC this year has worked toward defining where we are now. And next month we'll be discerning, are there gaps in where we are and where we want to be. To move forward, this campus must clearly establish and communicate what our philosophy will be, such that athletics and academics not only coexist, but provide overall strengths and support and enhancements to each other, so that this university can be proud of all that we do, whether learning and teaching occurs in the classroom, on the field, or in a stadium. Thank you.
Okay, Hunter, would you like to have people come forward, or do you want to give the panel a chance to comment?
If any panelists would like to say anything now, please feel free. If not, be happy to have members from the general public speak.
Okay, if you're interested in making a comment, you can just come to the microphone. You're just going back to your seat, yeah. Yep. Okay.
I apologize for not using the microphone. My back is out. I can't take about 5 minutes to hop down. You had mentioned that when you went to the top of the volcano that you saw someone wearing a North Carolina hat, and you mentioned how important it was to have alumni come back to campus. I was wondering, is having alumni come back to campus, is that critical in the overall educational mission of educating students? And the second part of that would be all the schools that are not at the BCS level, are they going bankrupt, or are they unable to educate their students since they don't offer big-time college schools?
Yeah, I think those are interesting points. And certainly, I'm hoping that this panel and all of you will weigh all of that. But I can tell you that my colleagues who are at schools that don't have what we have, where we have our logo all over the world, and it's very easy for us to get people to come back to campus. They are struggling in lots of different ways to come up with those kinds of things for other universities. Now, you're raising an interesting point, which is getting that worth what we have to put into it, and that's the very kind of thing that I hope this process will produce a discussion of. Yeah, John? There you go.
All right, John Stevens. I'm in European Studies and Political Science. And I'm also on the advisory committee for this student-athlete support program, and have been for the past 2 years. And in our deliberations, I'm not speaking for the committee, just for myself, a lot of things that people have touched on, we've talked about. But one thing seems to me to be particularly intractable, and that is the inordinate amount of time that these student-athletes, and not just in the money sports, spend doing the sports. We had a baseball player at one of our meetings, and I couldn't believe it. What he described, they basically were not in training from Thanksgiving to Christmas. That's it. and the rest of the year, the huge amounts of time, and a lot of it is captain's practice. And so it's really, in other words, it's basically NCAA rules being violated in the sense that they're practicing more than they should because it's not with the coaches. And somehow this university, the NCAA, and so on, don't have this under control.
Anyone else? Yeah. Come on down.
I'm Richard Kramer, a longtime faculty member, but no longer teaching. But I've been around the university for over 50 years. And I'm a sports fan, but also quite concerned. And I see things that have been mentioned today as being very relevant. I mean, there are lots of good schools that do not have Division I athletics who are doing very well for themselves. Certainly the school that our new chancellor is coming from is maybe not the wealthiest, but it's doing okay for itself, and the rest of the Ivy League is doing even better. I think that the athletes, I agree totally about the time that they have to spend on athletics without compensation. If they don't put in that extra time that's not sanctioned or not even approved maybe by the NCAA, they're not seen as being serious athletes, which I think is a problem. One of the issues that I think if the NCAA were out of this picture, student athletes or athletes who wanted to be students as well could maybe take their time in getting their degrees. They wouldn't be required to be in full-time students particularly during the seasons when they're playing. That would allow them to make progress. I think we have to admit that there's a certain number of athletes, and not just the revenue sports athletes, who come here not really wanting to be students, but wanting to be athletes. And they're here because that's the only way they can go to the next step, or maybe to spend a few years until they do something else. I think we ought to have a vehicle where we can allow our athletes representing our school. I'd love to have us get out of it. We have the facilities to bring in a professionalized athletic program representing Chapel Hill or North Carolina sports that would be doing just as much pride for Chapel Hill and the university if it was situated with our great facilities here, whether they were academically affiliated or not. That athletes could be students if they wanted to be, to the extent that they could be, and we wouldn't be having this adversarial or incompatible relationship between the two. Thank you.
Yeah. Come on down. You can just come down to the mics and line up, and I'll call on you in turn. Over here first, and then we'll go here, and then back over.
Chancellor, thank you very much for putting this panel together, and in particular for bringing these speakers here today. I think that was an extraordinary step in this process. My name's Bob Orr. I had the privilege, and I would underline privilege, of representing 4 of the UNC football players who were either charged with NCAA violations or were being investigated. What I discovered, and I was new to the issues, was how these young men have absolutely no rights in the system. Their reputations, their ability to continue their college education, to continue to participate in college athletics, is driven by a system from the top to the bottom, from the beginning to the end, where they have no voice and no rights. These are students at the University of North Carolina and around the country. They have a fundamental right, in my opinion, regardless of what the NCAA may say, to have a fair due process system in place if it's going to impact their lives and their abilities to continue as college students. And so I would encourage the panel to take a very serious look at the rights of student athletes, and I hate to use that term, in the context of the punishment process that the NCAA imposes. And one last thought, I think the determination of education-related violations belongs with the university and not with the NCAA. I have the greatest of confidence in the university and its system to address those issues appropriately, and we do not need to abdicate that educational responsibility to a group in Indianapolis. Thank you very much.
Okay.
My name is Lou Margolis, and I'm in the School of Public Health. My comment is directed to the panel. I encourage you, I implore you, to be very clear in how you frame this discussion. And I was not prepared to speak today, but I am going to speak because of what I have heard so far. We began with 3 presentations, first by Chancellor Thorp, about testable assumptions, but unproven assumptions about the role that big-time sports plays for universities. And Holden, I'll take just a little personal offense. As a University of Chicago graduate, we're just doing fine. But you framed it that way. And then we had this kind of historical inevitability that was presented by Mr. Cunningham. And then we came back to your very articulate and compelling distress over the impotence that chancellors and presidents have. I don't think that's a good way to define this issue, the inevitability of history and the impotence that we have. I think that the lessons that were raised, the points that were raised by Jay Billis, by Richard Southall, and by Jay Smith, help us to get to the core of what the challenges are, and those challenges need to be the basis for our deliberations. I think all the rest is commentary about that. So please be clear in how you frame this discussion. Thanks.
My name is Philip Blatt, and I've been to each of the discussions that's been held at the university, thanks to Bubba and Chancellor Thorp. And my question to the panel is really a simple one. I think the problems and issues have been outlined. I don't ever come away from any of these discussions with any sense that anybody really can figure out how to even start to fix the problem. And it's like the balloon is too big to be burst. And I would hope that somewhere along the way, when we keep having these discussions, there can be the next part of the discussion is what is a rational way to approach the problem?
Maybe I could just say a quick word in reply to that. We're going to solve all the problems. Obviously, that's a joke. You're right. This is all very tough stuff. And I'll say a few words at the end, very few words at the end, on how we're going to try to approach this because we do want to be helpful.
Okay, Joe.
I'm Joe Farrell. I'm the Secretary of the Faculty. I would invite the panel to address the question of what is the appropriate role of the faculty as a whole in this endeavor. And I invite you to examine the structures of governance that we have put in place to carry out that role and help us evaluate as to whether those structures are effective, whether there are things that you can see there that we could do, that we could revise to make the faculty role better. Because that's what we want to do, and we tend to assume that because we've been doing it this way for the last 50, no, actually the code was written in 1950, so we've been doing it this way for 63 years. There may be a better way to do it, and help us to find that.
Okay, over here. Thank you for being here. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Miles Robinson. I'm a sophomore in the UNC School of Journalism and Mass Communication. I just want to talk from a student perspective, and a lot of what I'm about to say stems from the fact that I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and also hearing from Mr. Cunningham at our Sports Business Club meeting this past week. I feel like a lot of talk is about what the NCAA needs to do better, and I think a lot of it can also be talked about what they're already doing. They're doing very well. I know, Mr. Cunningham, you mentioned to our Sports Business Club meeting that a lot of times when you're in this bubble of UNC, a lot of focus is on what the 2% that we're doing wrong, when the rest of the world, the rest of the country is focused on what we're doing right. And I think that, for instance, we're talking about college athletics. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the SEEDS project. If you Google seedproject.org, they have an academy that actually one of the students on Louisville's basketball team was actually an alum of the academy. And I'm not sure if he is going to plan on using this after he graduates, but he's probably going to be a lottery pick in the NBA. But what the SEEDS Academy actually does is run out of New York, and the person that founded it is Noah Levine. He played at Princeton University on the basketball team. And what the SEEDS Academy basically uses is basketball, and well, basketball specifically, but just sports in general, as an engine to help change the lives of people internationally. And they start off in Senegal, and they're trying to drop the S in SEEDS, to just put the SEED project, to basically expand not only to Senegal, but to other parts of the world and domestically as well. They have an office in Manhattan, New York, which is where I'll be this summer. And hopefully I'll get involved with it. But basically what I want to say is maybe some of the focus needs to be on what the NCAA is doing right, in addition to the discussion of what they're doing wrong.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a first-year student. My name is Larry Hahn. I just wanted to say that part of what attracted me to come to UNC in the first place was the great sports programs that UNC does offer. But I do see a problem in terms of the way in which students are recruited to come to colleges to play sports. And I think part of that can be illustrated through the one-and-done process we've seen in college basketball. Specifically, institutions like University of Kentucky, which this year has recruited 6 McDonald's All-Americans to come to Kentucky. I feel like it's creating almost a factory. These institutions of higher learning are not, the purpose has been kind of changed in a way that I don't like, and I don't think anybody on the panel likes either. What would you say to that in terms of how the universities work with maybe the NBA or other professional commissions to address these issues? Thank you.
Okay, very good. Art Chansky.
Thank you for that introduction, Chancellor.
The Art Chansky, how's that?
Yeah, my name's Art Chansky. I've been involved with college athletics for 40 years in various capacities, and I just want to be pragmatic and cut to the chase here. What Jay Billis said, and some others have indicated, this is all about money. It's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and it's all about the money that people are afraid, people in control are afraid that's going to not come in anymore, or money that's going to be lost, so athletic departments can't be funded, coaches can't make the enormous salaries that they're making. So my question to the panel, the esteemed panel, it seems pretty easy that you could come up with a structure, a pay-for-play structure, something that everybody would agree on, pay the athletes, let them go to school if they want. If they don't, they have a lifetime scholarship to go back to that school. Something that you could agree on. So my question to the panel is, why not? And of the 4 things that I wrote down, what is keeping the group from getting together? Number 1 is a government intervention, which would change the tax status. And if you pay athletes, you're involved in workman's compensation and other huge costs of insurance. Number 2, the flood of lawsuits from retroactive pay to athletes that would invite a flood of lawsuits, a la the Ed O'Bannon case, which we're seeing right now. And number 3, the presidents and the ADs in favor of change are also afraid that they'd be jeopardizing their jobs by standing up and advocating change by the governance of the universities, many of whom are more interested in winning than anything else. And number 4, the fear among the ADs and the coaches of a loss of competitive advantage, or in other words, getting a competitive disadvantage while these changes are being made, which would equal the loss of money that's needed in at these universities to continue going. So I'd like any member of the panel to address, it doesn't seem that hard to come up with a solution. Why can't the group, no one president, Chancellor Thorp's not going to stand up and leave the room by himself and say this has got to change. 300 presidents have to stand up together. 300 ADs have to stand up together and say, we're going to change. My question is, what is I know it's money, obviously it's money, but what do you think is keeping the changes to be made, to come up with a plan, a realistic plan that has to involve pay for play, because obviously that's where this is going, but to maintain some integrity of academics at the university. Thank you.
Thanks, Art. Paul Friga? Oh, yeah. Does somebody want to answer?
Sure. I think you answered the question very well yourself. You said the problem is money and what's preventing 300 presidents from getting up, along with 300 athletic directors, to do something about it. I think you answered it.
Okay, Paul.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Friga. I'm a professor in the business school, Keenan Flagler School of Business, of Strategy and Entrepreneurship. I had the honor of working with Bubba Cunningham and his staff and the faculty, and I'm also a member of the faculty council. We work together on a strategic plan, and he's executing it in this discussion, a very important discussion, and trying to lead this conversation. My small point today is that we make quite a few assumptions about how the students feel and how they're affected by this, but I haven't seen, and apologize if I've missed it, a systematic survey with data that really represents what they think and how they feel about the model. So small suggestion, anonymous, thoroughly done, multi-university, current and former students, to give us some data that can help inform the process.
Hi, I'm Sue Walsh, and I know there are other student athletes here in the room. No one else stood up, so I would
Thank you for doing
speak
this, Sue. Yeah.
on our behalf. Professor Smith, I do appreciate your passion about what you do. We certainly need more teachers who really love what they do and realize how important it is to the future. I was also passionate about what I did and what I continue to do, and I do believe that the vast majority of us who participate in athletics are or were student athletes. I had plenty of institutions I could have looked at. Some were not so great academically, but I chose Carolina because of its academic reputation. I was not only an NCAA champion and an Olympian, but also Phi Beta Kappa. And I found that as a swimmer, and I cannot speak to the baseball players, but that I actually did much better academically when I was in training, and I was focused, and I was disciplined, and could manage my time. And without my sport, I would not have ever been able to attend a university of this stature. So I challenge the panel to look out for the rest of us who really felt that we needed and took advantage of the athletic side of our academic experience. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Sue. Yeah.
My name is Autumn McClellan. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in sociology, graduate student instructor, and former tutor of student athletes. So I know a lot of this stuff from all sides of from the classroom and whatever. So a lot of talk has been made about pay for play and how we would compensate these athletes, but I would just like to highlight that there are many students on this campus who are involved in student government and student organizations who do a lot to promote this university in the local community and internationally as well. And nobody's discussing them being paid. Some of our student government, higher ranking student government people are getting maybe a stipend of $1,500, and I think that that kind of compensation is being seen by our student athletes currently. So I would just say that they are like other students, and although they might be contributing to profits for the university, so are non-student athletes as well.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Yeah. Chris Browning in the history department, a colleague of Jay Smith's. I was a two-sport athlete in college, and I thought it was a great enrichment to my education. I think part of the problem here deals exactly with two things that have been said, and that is the myth of the scholar athlete and the myth of amateurism. For many people, those aren't a myth. For a few, it is. And the problem is, I think we have to decouple our role as a minor league trainer for professional leagues in football and basketball and all the other sports. In baseball and ice hockey, people have a choice. They can go to a professionally financed minor league, they can pay for play, or they can get all the benefits of a college education, have a wonderful experience, and go on to a career in that if they want. It's only in basketball and football where we seem to have made ourselves a partner and a monopoly over these people, and then we deprive them of that choice in terms of the athletes, impose all these rules, and then wonder why there's the corruption. There should be two paths to the NFL and two paths to the NBA, and the professional league should pay for that second path, and we should be dealing with scholar athletes who want to be here and want to play and study.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah.
I would encourage the panel to think about, I've been thinking about this as, you know, an ombuds for the athletic department, or maybe it's a conflict coach. Just like you have nutritional coaches and strength coaches, maybe there ought to be a conflict coach so that student athletes or other people involved in the athletic department who have issues can go get coaching on what to do with that information. The Rutgers situation particularly brought that to home to me. So I encourage the panel to think about that idea. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take, if there's other questions, come on down, but if not, we'll take this last question. Okay, y'all go ahead. Oh, I see you waiting for it. Go ahead.
Good afternoon.
And then we'll give the panel a chance to maybe go 5 or 10 more minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Daniel Goodman. I'm an exercise and sports science major, sophomore. We talked about the myth of the student athlete a little bit, and I just, on some occasions, I'm sure that's true, but I also want to just provide a quick example of somebody who that's not the case for. A man by the name of Myron Roll. He was a safety for Florida State Seminoles, played football, and he was also a Rhodes Scholar, which, as we all know, is one of the most prestigious scholarships that you can achieve. And he also went on to play in the NFL, but he made very clear during his time at Florida State and for the Pittsburgh Steelers that his lifelong goal was not to be in the NFL. His lifelong goal was to be a doctor, and I believe a neurosurgeon specifically. But so he's now since left the NFL, and he's pursuing that degree. So just as one example, that's somebody who took his education very seriously in addition to being a world-class athlete.
Great. Barbara Osborne and then Deb Stroman.
Hi. I guess I need to be over here. I'm glad to hear the people who've come to talk about different student-athlete experiences. Students are supposed to come to colleges and universities in order to find out more about themselves, learn more about the world, and then figure out their role as they go forward to become productive citizens. That's the big picture, or at least that's what we're always told, that the big picture is supposed to be. And I really think that that big picture does encompass both the for-profit student athletes as well as the, what did you call them, Richard? Expenditure student athletes, yeah. People seem to be thinking that, people don't have a choice, and that for athletes who want to be professional athletes, that they don't have a choice but to go to college. And the reality is that they do have a choice, and they can come here and they can do the one and done thing, or they can come here and also take advantage of everything else that is available to every other student on this campus. And so if you're a one and done and you go on to your professional career, great. If you want to come here and take advantage of all the things this university has to offer and take advantage of all the resources that this university provides in order to develop your passions and your athletic skill, whether you're a field hockey player that's not going to go on to a professional career or a basketball or football player. We have that too. And the whole notion that athletes aren't being compensated irritates the crap out of me. Sorry. They are so compensated. They get admission to a university. They have an opportunity for an education. They get the best facilities, the best training. They get to travel. They get all sorts of things that other students don't have access to. And in order to pay for all of that stuff that they get, they in turn provide entertainment for a bunch of other people. For those football players and basketball players that are feeling so imposed upon, the thing that launches them to their professional career is the opportunity to play in this arena. It's the opportunity to have that coaching. It's the nutritional counseling. It's everything else that they get. And it's the branding they acquire by being able to play in front of 60,000 people in a stadium. So they are, in fact, compensated more than adequately. It's not just a scholarship. It's a lot of other stuff that gets invested in making them better people. And if they're not willing to choose to take advantage of that, that's an individual choice. We can compare that to the straight-A student who comes here, I don't want to disparage fraternities or sororities, but, joins a social organization and completely, lets go any academic aspirations they have because they've frittered it away on doing other sorts of things. So, we need to take into consideration individual choice as well as what the university does produce.
Yep. Okay, Deb.
Thank you. Debbie Stroman, EXSS faculty, and I agree with you, Chancellor Thorp, that indeed big-time athletics is here. So I'm posing this to the panel for future conversation or for our campus. If we're truly committed to the holistic development of the athlete, and in particular the black athlete, football, men's basketball, how can we better provide a comfortable place and climate besides those in the athletic department and particular faculty members' offices? So I'm speaking for the athletic department staff and faculty members like myself, as in having that comfortable place where they can go to without being viewed as one who has limited concern for the entire educational mission of the university, without being viewed as favoring athletes, as in we're corrupt, without being viewed as we don't care about non-athletes. I don't think it's healthy to be labeled as a communist or a socialist or something's wrong with us because we favor or we're very, very concerned with our athletes on campus.
Okay, we'll take one more, and then we'll give the panel a chance to say some things. So go ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Deb.
Hello, my name is Joy Gales. I'm actually from that institution down the street, NC State. So I came today because I study intercollegiate athletics in higher ed. This is a topic that's very interesting to me. So the whole pay-for-play issue I consider to be a moral dilemma. And one of the courses that I teach is student development theory, and we talk about moral issues. And one of the ways in which you try to resolve more issues is through perspective taking. And I think that's a lot of what's happened here today, is that we've heard from presidents, we've heard some perspective from the NCAA. We haven't heard as much from student athletes. We've heard from scholars, faculty members. So that's the approach that I think will be beneficial, is to take the perspectives of all the constituents that are involved in intercollegiate athletics and higher education, and what can we learn from those perspectives, and what changes can we make based on the different perspectives that are involved.
Very good summary, thanks. Okay, thank you all, and Hunter, I'll give you a chance to say some things, and if other people on the panel want to, and then when we get close to the time, I'll wrap it up.
Good. I have a few things to say, but does any other panelist feel the desire to speak? Okay. Yes, Amy.
I just wanted to say one thing with regard to my background. There's been a couple of references here to choice in basketball. And one tiny aspect of my background, in addition to being an athlete and working at the NCAA and working on campus and working with the Knight Commission, I worked for the NBA for a short period of time when they launched a minor league that still exists. So you can tell you that shows in itself how popular it is, because a lot of people don't know it exists. But there actually is a choice, and it's an NBA development league. And so I just wanted to say that for the record, because it is an interesting part of this entire debate.
Thank you, Amy. Let me say a few things that I hope will be helpful in enabling you to see how we want to go about this study. First, I think this has been a model forum today. We've had a lot of candor. We've had a lot of intelligent suggestions. We've had a certain amount of passion, which this subject tends to generate. We've also had references from everything from Jackie Sherrill to Roland Barthes. And that's unusual. So only a topic like intercollegiate athletics can engender that kind of diverse point of view. So I thank you for all of your comments. To me, this is Exhibition A or Exhibit A on why this is a very good place, because you've got a strong faculty. I'd like to especially thank the faculty for their voice today. We don't hear a lot of faculty voices on this issue generally, and today I thought they were sharp as a tack. So let me give you just a brief sense of how we look at our work. We were able to hold a meeting prior to coming here at 1 o'clock. And this might be helpful to make the process at least a bit more transparent. The first thing we agreed on is that we're not looking back, we're looking forward. So we're not here to try to examine or investigate what went on the last few years. That's not our purpose. We want to make recommendations for the future. Second, of course, we're going to be able to make recommendations, but we don't have any governing authority over the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So we offer those recommendations with every hope that they'll be helpful, but that's as far as we can go. We want to be helpful to the new chancellor when she comes in and provide, we hope, some ideas that she might find helpful, but we want to be open also as well to the whole community here, students, faculty, and staff. We don't have a set time frame yet for our work, so we haven't decided how long we're going to take. Holden left that up to us, and that's good. So we may take a few months. We may take a little longer than that. We haven't decided yet. We're going to focus on the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. But at the same time, we recognize that what we have to say will probably be of interest to Division I athletic programs generally. And we would like to focus particularly on those institutions within Division I which are like the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So we're not going to be addressing issues in Division III or Division II, or frankly at institutions that bear very little resemblance to this one. So we're going to be concentrating on the kinds of ideas that will be helpful here and to universities like this one. We also want to make certain that we address the role of the faculty, the role of the administration, the role of the trustees in trying to make recommendations for you. And finally, we want to see if we can't come to grips with these problems in a bold way. What I mean by that is that we don't want to make small recommendations about discrete items within intercollegiate athletics. We want to make some bold recommendations that try to help institutions like this one address the very significant problems that exist. I'm very cognizant of the problems that intercollegiate athletics have caused in the last few years at our AAU universities. Many problems have arisen. They've been severe. So now clearly our universities are more vulnerable to problems in this arena than they have ever been before. I don't have to mention very many names to make that evident, but if you simply think about Penn State, now Rutgers, Chapel Hill, and other of our very fine flagship universities, you see how quickly major problems in this arena cause very significant difficulties for these institutions. So we see this as an arena then that has a tremendous impact and can do so very rapidly. So with that, then we will start our work, and again, a thank you to everyone who participated.
Thank you. I'm sure there's something from Shakespeare, or maybe Hunter Rawlings has something from classical Greek about what I have done by putting this together and then getting in my car and driving across the Mississippi River. But I feel that the part of this that I was responsible for was even better than I could have imagined it being. And so to all the diverse ideas and viewpoints that came out today, thank you. This is precisely what we had imagined, and precisely the kind of thing that should happen at a great research university like this. And to the panel who have given this extraordinary time and now have committed to give even more under Hunter's leadership. Amy, Bob, Pat, Jim, Hunter, thank you for what you are doing for higher education and for the University of North Carolina. And thank you all for coming today.